Hello, everybody. I am, to be quite frank and honest with you, really scared because I'm doing a really important podcast tomorrow morning at 4 a.m. Actually, not a great time to be doing to be doing anything except sleeping. But yeah. So that's happening, and I am so excited about it. But I'm also just really scared because I want to represent Quasar and I want to represent them well, and so I just thought that I'd do a live stream, basically just practicing some of the responses in the podcast and show you my tactic for practicing telling stories for stuff like this. I've never done a podcast like this before, but I have a bit of practice, especially with marketing, just practicing to tell my story, and practicing to do webinars, even though I don't think I've ever actually done one live. And there's a few tricks and stuff that I've learned along the way. So I just thought, like, hey, why not just crack everything open, give myself a little bit of pressure by doing this live, and yeah, sort of like give you guys an idea of how I'm going to prepare for this. And then maybe I can't tell you what the name of the podcast is. Well, maybe I can, but I'm not sure if I can, so I'm not going to. I'll let you know closer to the date when I know when it's going to be released. But yeah, I just thought, why not practice in a real life sort of scenario when I'm streaming live, even though, nobody might be watching right now. I know that people will watch it because it'll be on the interwebs forever. So that kind of pressure, I guess, I'm trying to practice, talking with that kind of pressure on me. Yeah, so I'm scared. It's going to be at 4 a.m. tomorrow morning, but I'm also ridiculously excited at the opportunity to share my love for Quasar with the world. And so here I've got a text document and I want to show you like how I would take notes for something like this. Because I think what most people would do is they go over the top with notes, whereas I basically just want to give myself cues for certain stories that I want to tell. I find the best way to teach in a podcast setting is through stories. That's not true for when you're teaching content through a video. However, when you're doing podcasts, when you're trying to teach high-level concepts, I think stories are the best way to teach. And so, yeah, I'm gonna kind of like write some notes down that I plan on using, and gonna cross my fingers and yeah, get scared. All right, so the first question I've got here is how did you get started in development? I'm starting to get a blocked nose, but I can't make sniffling sounds because I'm on like live stream. And there we go, just did it anyway. So, whoop, there you go. Oh, by the way, let me know if my microphone is good now because I basically put in a real time because it's going to be done live on Zoom. I put in a real time what do you call it? Noise canceling for my microphone. So let me know if this is good, if it's better than what it usually sounds like. It's going to be a lot louder than it usually sounds like and automatically get rid of background noise. And if it's really good, I might just use these settings for my videos moving forward so that I don't have to, do all my mic setting stuff all over again. And I might as well show you guys. I'm just going to procrastinate here and show you guys how I set this up. I basically just opened up the Pulse Audio settings. If you're on a Linux, let me just zoom in a bit here. Yeah, if you're using Linux, what you can do is you can actually come in here and change some settings. And Pulse Audio actually has this noise canceling module that it has available for free out of the box. But most people don't even know about it because you have to go through all this work in order to enable it. So anyway, I've enabled that, and now it's just made my microphone sound awesome without any editing. So like I said, I might just use this in the future. So I just changed the settings there, and I think there's like a command that basically runs it. Anyway, enough procrastination. All right, so the first question I have here for them to ask me, and I don't even know if they're going to ask me all these questions, so it could just be completely off the cuff, and they might not ask any, so we'll see what happens. Anyway, the first one is, how did you get started, in development? And I think I actually chose these questions myself. All right, so basically I want to add some points that I want to cover here. And the point is literally just going to be like, I'll probably put in here like piano story. And I might even put the end in so I know where I'm going. So discovered Quasar. All right, so let me just have a crack at this. So yeah, how did you get started in development? Yeah, so my development journey kind of started quite a while back. Nope, I've already screwed it up. I'm already getting scared because you guys are watching me. All right, let's go again. So I actually started really late in development because I started off studying musical theater and classical piano. And so that was kind of my world. And I'd done like a little bit of game development using a platform called Construct 2 to build my own games. So if you want to start learning development using like a click draggy based type thing, then you should totally check that out. I basically became a developer by accident when I was a kid. So yeah. Anyway, that's kind of like a little bit of how I started. But then I basically completely forgot about development, went over to the other side of Australia to study classical piano and musical theatre. So I did a bit of musical theatre, classical piano, and in that process, I learned a musical language called solfege, or it's also called solfa. And so solfege is basically, like I said, a musical language where you can convert the sounds that you hear into kind of like a music theory. So if you've ever seen The Sound of Music and they talk about that song, Do, a deer, a female deer, that song, um they're actually teaching solfege through that song. And the pattern is do re mi fa sol la ti do. And so that's how I learned. That's one of the things I learned at university. And I thought, this is so cool. I can actually start converting the sounds that I'm hearing in day-to-day life. I can start converting those sounds into music theory and start noticing patterns in them. And so I thought, you know what? I'd love to. I had a really great teacher that would play games with us that I thought was so fun. These music games, and I thought it would be really cool to create web applications or web games that teach solfege. And so my coding journey started off with a vision. So rather than thinking I really want to code, I had a vision in my head of something that I actually wanted to build. So yeah, what I ended up doing was, after I finished my degree, I became a piano teacher for a while, and I was kind of started working on this side project. And because I just wanted that vision to become a reality so bad, and I wanted to be the one that created it, I really like sort of digging in and creating things myself. I started teaching myself web development. And so through that, I came across PHP and eventually Laravel, and I started learning JavaScript and jQuery and CSS. And by the way, I discovered that I absolutely hate writing CSS, but more on that later on. Yeah, so it all came out of a desire to fulfill this vision of being of creating this website that teaches solfege. But as a byproduct of that, I accidentally fell in love with coding. And so I kind of like fell out of love with music. I still love music, but not as much as I just adore writing code now. And so, yeah, I discovered that's sort of how I came across web development. And then in my journey, I slowly began to realize that I hate writing CSS. And so I would spend about 70 to 80% of my time writing CSS, no joke, because I was so obsessed with how things looked. And I didn't know anything about design, so I just tinker around all of the time. And then one day I come across, I should probably step back here. I started like experimenting with these different frameworks, and I discovered material design. And, obviously I discovered Bootstrap. And so I, learned a few of these other frameworks like Vuetify and, stuff like that. But then one day I came across Quasar. And to me, Quasar was one of those frameworks that I'd always heard bits and pieces about, but it was actually pretty much the last like main framework that I'd heard of. So I'd heard of like Vuetify, I'd heard of Nuxt, I'd heard of Gridsome, and Quasar was just kind of like this background framework to me at the time that I never really knew what it did. I thought it was just like about building mobile apps or something like that. But anyway, I discovered Quasar, and it absolutely blew my mind and opened up my world. So rather than focusing on writing CSS all the time, I was able to just focus on writing code. That was the big sell for me. We can talk later on about what makes Quasar great for different reasons, and a lot of people will have different answers for that. But for me at the time, it was just the fact that I had so many components, a massive component library, and so much flexibility. And through all of that flexibility, I was able to design whatever I wanted to create. And so that's kind of a bit of my story. I started off with musical theater and piano, and now here I am a few years later as a web developer. And I actually work as a full-time web developer now using Quasar. So yeah, that's how that's kind of a bit of my development starting in web dev. All right, so that wasn't too bad. I'm moderately happy with that, so I'm just going to move on. That's how I got started in web development. All right, so what's the next question? What makes Quasar different to other frameworks? What makes Quasar different to other frameworks? And if you guys want to like throw something in that you think that I should also talk about, then go ahead and like mention that in the comments. All right, so I thought of a few things here that makes it different. I think I summarized it into 3 different things. So now I just want to have them written down here so that I can easily read them. And let's create a bit of a gap there. And maybe I can make this bigger as well. Otherwise I'm going to like freak out that everything is too small. And I from experience, you want to be able to find exactly what you need really quickly when you're podcasting, because you're gonna forget very quickly. So you need to know where those cues are like instantly. So maybe I can make this a bit bigger. I don't even know how to use this. Here we go, font and colors. Oh, sweet, I can come in here and change it to my own. Mono regular, yep, that's good. And how about we go to about 22? Oh, sweet, I should have done this years ago. That might be too big. No, it'll be fine. I shouldn't need more notes than what covers that page, what I see at the moment. All right, what makes Quasar different to other frameworks? The first thing that I want to talk about here is the fact that it exports to all platforms. That is the original sell. This is not the sell for me. That's probably what got me into it, but I don't think that's the greatest thing about Quasar. However, it's kind of like the point that sort of pulls people into learning about Quasar in the first place. All right, so, oh cool, we got more people viewing now. Let me know how my mic is. If you'd let me know in the comments, that'd be really awesome. To let me know if it's sounding good. I've made like a few adjustments to it. Let me know if it like gets too loud at times and all that jazz. So yeah, anyway, it exports to all platforms. The other one was a stellar component library. And I want to remove all of these extra words. So how about we say, I want to keep it super simple so that I can just take a glance at this and see it straight away. So component libraries, and the last thing I wanted to talk about was full developer experience. And I think this is really underrated in the Quasar world. The fact that Quasar gives you all of this other stuff out of the box. So like utility classes and stuff like that. You really do get a full developer experience with Quasar. Anyway, why am I telling you this now? I'm about to talk about it in a second. All right, so I'm just going to dive right into it. What makes Quasar different to other frameworks? All right, so this is a great question that I get all of the time. And there's a few things, 3 things that I want to cover that I usually give answers for this. And feel free to interrupt me at any point if you want me to dig deeper on anything. But really it's 3 things, which is the fact that it exports to all platforms. That's the first thing. Mike's good. We'll check real levels in a bit. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Jux. How do I say that? Jux or Jux? Sounds, it looks French, but yeah, anyway. Okay, so it exports to all platforms. It's got a ridiculously large component library with a phenomenal API, and it gives you a full developer experience. And that last point I really want to dig into, but let's kind of go through these one at a time. So it exports to all platforms. Now, when I first discovered Quasar, this freaked me out, if I'm really honest. And in fact, it almost completely turned me away from Quasar. And that might be weird to hear, but I think a lot of people have this experience where they think, if it exports to all platforms, you kind of subconsciously think, well, it probably does a bad job exporting to the platform I want to use because it's going to be focused on all platforms. However, that is absolutely not the case. So it exports to all platforms really, really well. And just to sort of give you a background of this, at my work, we only use Quasar, at least for now, to build PWAs. However, later on down the line, if, and this will totally happen, if we want to build native mobile applications, we will be able to do that literally within about 5 minutes. If we want to build an Electron application, if we want to do PW8 or SPA, we've got the choice between those. SSR, if we want to build different parts of the site that are super focused on SEO. Quasar exports to all of these platforms, which is absolutely fantastic. And once again, I want to stress here, it does all of those platforms really well. In fact, most of the sites I build, instead of using other material design frameworks, I just use Quasar and I use it in SPA mode, and it does a phenomenal job of it. It does, handles things like code splitting, or minification, all that stuff that you would expect out of the box. So that's one of the things that makes it different to other frameworks. It really does export to all platforms and exports them really well. And now the other thing, and this really is the heart of Quasar, it's got a component library that is second to none. I am constantly blown away by how flexible this component library is, and it's massive. I don't know how many components there are, but it's bigger than your average component library. And the crazy thing is, Razvan, the guy who created this, somehow he's managed to create a massive component library that is ridiculously flexible and bug-free. I have never come across, in fact, okay, there's one bug I ever came across in the component library. But apart from that, the entire thing, and I've used almost every component library and every aspect of the component library because I've done a video series on all of them. And every single component in that library is stellar, easy to mold exactly how you use it via slots and attributes. And so that's the other thing that I really think differentiates it from other frameworks. The component library is not only ridiculously easy to use, it is extremely flexible. And that's one of the things I adore about Quasar. Now, the other thing is it gives you a full developer experience. So what do I mean by that? So I come from the Laravel world. And one of the things that I absolutely love about Laravel, one of the things I think they nailed, is that they kind of guide you in the right direction. So the Laravel framework helps you write code the right way. That doesn't mean you can't write code the wrong way, but it guides you into a direction of writing code the right way. And one of the ways it does that is by offering you a massive library of things like Eloquent. I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast use Laravel. So, things like Eloquent, things like policies, things like what's another example? Anyway, this isn't about Laravel. This is about Quasar. The point I'm making is I fell in love with Laravel because it helped guide me in the right direction when I was starting out as a developer. Now, Quasar is the same. It's got a whole bunch of utility classes and utility functions that allow you to write code the right way as someone who wants to export to many platforms. So I'll give you an example. A whole bunch of layout utility classes are available out of the box with Quasar. So things like margins and paddings, and the way that you handle your grid, all that kind of stuff is built in to Quasar so that you can do it the right way from the beginning and sort of do it the Quasar quote unquote way. And this is great for onboarding new people as well, because it means you can be like, look, study the docs and you'll have a stellar experience with Quasar. So that's one thing that really differentiates it. And just stuff like the creator didn't like any of the date libraries available. And so he created his own date library that works really well exporting to other platforms. Color libraries for manipulating colors. So, Quasar really isn't just a CSS framework that exports to other platforms. It is a framework that gives you a full developer experience. So that's one of the other things that I adore about Quasar. And yeah, so that's what makes it different. Exports to all platforms, stellar component library, and it gives you a full developer experience. All right, so I thought that was okay. Yeah, I don't really have any notes for myself on that. I've already practiced this once before. Let me know if any of that, I know I tend to babble on a little bit, so I'm trying to keep it concise, at least, as concise as I can, because I'm not the most concise person. But yeah, so let's move on to the next question, which is, do I have to use material design? All right, so a lot of you, especially if you've used Quasar before and you're watching this live stream right now, you probably know that Quasar is a material design framework. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail in the podcast, sort of answering this question, because I think I don't think it's a simple yes or no question. All right. Okay, so this is a great question, and we get it asked quite a bit in the Quasar community. Am I restricted to using material design? And the answer to this is actually kind of yes. That's kind of the official answer. Yes. However, the answer is also kind of no, and let me explain that. So as I mentioned before, Quasar is ridiculously flexible, and the component design gives you a lot of control. And let me just give you some real-world examples here. Okay, I've kind of gone off the rails a bit there, so I'm going to try and answer this again. Yeah, so the answer is kind of yes and no. And the reason I say that is because out of the box, Quasar uses material design. When you create an input component, it is going to be a beautiful material design component. However, you have a ridiculous amount of flexibility with that component. So if you want, you can give it an outline design. If you want, you can give it a field design. If you want, you can completely remove the label. So a lot of you might know material design, you get kind of this label. You can remove that. You can change the way errors are displayed. You can add icons before and after it. So you can change the padding within that input. And it's the same with every component in Quasar. They are ridiculously extendable and changeable. So I'll give you another example. The button component, you can change the padding. You can make it flat. You can make it unelevated. You can make the shadows exactly how you want the shadows to be. You can, add more shadow or remove the shadow entirely. So all of this to say, yes, it uses material design by default. However, by simply adding a few attributes, you can completely remove the material design, the quote-unquote material design feel. So I think that's a really important thing to point out with Quasar. Even though it uses material design out of the box, it has a whole lot of flexibility to basically make it look and feel exactly how you want it to feel. So one more thing on that, when you first create a Quasar application, and by the way, everything I just explained, no CSS required. You can write CSS if you want within your components, but once again, I hate writing CSS, and no CSS is required to completely remove the material design feel. And so one more thing I kind of wanted to add on that is don't be scared by the fact that it looks like material design when you first create a Quasar project, because it really is simple to just add little tweaks here and there to completely remove that material design feel. I personally love material design. I love that I don't have to think about, material design is a specification that has been tested for years and years by the Google team. And, on millions and millions of people use these applications every day. So I understand why people want to design their own websites their own way. And, that totally makes sense. And you totally should do that if that's the kind of thing you want to do with your website. And you can do it in Quasar. However, for me, the fact that the material design is so rigorously tested is one of the reasons why I'm just going to stick to it. I trust it. It's very easy to create a nice UI experience, and that's why I love it so much. Above 7, all good, really. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Jux. Okay, great. So that's my answer. I think I did a good job there. Let me know if you thought I didn't, but I thought I did a pretty good job explaining why. Let's just add it here. Yes and no. That's kind of the phrase that sort of sends me off there. All right, I was pretty happy with that. So let's go straight on to the next one. Oh, I love this next question. I love it. Does it scale well? All right. All right, this is going to be really fun to answer because I've actually had experience with scaling Quasar in the real world. I should probably start this with a story. It really is best to sort of demonstrate these things with a story. So, all right. So, yeah, this is what I'll do. I'll talk about in the context of the place where I work. So, AgriPath started small. Started exporting Excel or importing Excel docs. Yeah, so how about we say AgriPath? I'm going to explain this story in a second when I practice it. So Excel docs, and I'll say importing. In fact, I can probably say imports. Like I mentioned before, I like to keep these so concise that I glance at it and I instantly know what I'm going to talk about. All right, so let's just space this a little bit better. Does it scale well? This is a really great question, and it's kind of a loaded question, and I just want to answer it with my own experience building websites with Quasar, because I've been working on a project for about 3 or 4 years now, a Quasar project, and there's kind of a few aspects that I kind of want to cover with scaling Quasar. So, yeah, when I first started at the job that I work at a company called Agripath, and the first thing they wanted me to do was just take an Excel spreadsheet because their whole company was on Excel spreadsheets and they wanted to move to a database. So they wanted me to take an Excel spreadsheet and basically import it into a database and then spit it out into like a table so that we can do, and then start doing like graphing and stuff like that. So really cool first project to start with because I got to use Laravel in order to do all of the Excel stuff on the back end, but then I got to use Quasar to use like the table component to display everything. So it started really, really small, a tiny project. And then I did that, and then they started wanting more and more stuff because they were like, oh, cool, you were able to do that pretty quickly. Can you do this as well? Can you graph this? Can we start doing data entry for, doing crop collections and, the different types of events that you would do in a crop? And it gradually became more and more complicated. And what we began to realize as we were scaling this app is that we actually wanted to build a whole bunch of mini applications, right? So rather than just having an app that 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 all sat within one app, sometimes you might want a farmer who just focuses on rainfall collection, or a farmer who just focuses on livestock collection, for example. All right, so we kind of have this vision in our company of having 20 or even 30 apps, which means that we need to have code that isn't repeating itself all the time. So I'm going to put a flag in that and kind of move on. So that's kind of the vision we had with the company. So we needed a framework that was going to scale well with us, and Quasar was that framework. So one of the first problems we ran into is with our front-end application. The file size with Quasar started to get really, really big, and so we needed to start doing code splitting. And what I didn't realize is that you can literally, with one line of code, start implementing code splitting. And by using pages behind the scenes with Quasar, code splitting actually is done for you by default, with the default recommended way that they add pages. And so that's one way that it scaled really well with us. As our project got larger and larger, we were able to maintain a small file size by using code splitting through Quasar. Now, I know a lot of other frameworks do that, but I just wanted to mention that, yes, Quasar does have code splitting available out of the box. So that's one aspect in which it scales really well. However, we reached a point where I was copy-pasting a lot of code across our apps because all users were logging in the same way. And usually dealing with a problem like this is really difficult to deal with. Like, how do I have my login logic the same across all of my applications? In order to do that, you want to be able to share components. You also want to be able to basically tap into the routes so that you can change the routes in one place so that all of your apps will then change the routing in the same way. If you're like login routes and your register routes and all that kind of stuff. And so these are kind of the problems that we started running into, where a lot of the stuff we did in one app, we were doing in the others. And to sort of stay with that example of authentication, Quasar actually offers what's called app extensions, okay? We call them AEs for short. And an app extension allows you to configure everything about Quasar. And I mean everything. You can extend... you can create your own components based off of Quasar components. You can tap into the routing. You can tap into Webpack. You can basically change anything that you like about within your Quasar application. And so using an app extension, we were able to create an authentication app extension. And now every time we create a new app, we literally just use that app extension. And now we're able to create a login, including, by the way, the login form itself. That's included in our app extension. That entire process now works for us just with an app extension. And we could make 50 different apps and they would all log in the same way. And then all we'd have to do, if we want to change the way we log in, Like maybe we swap out our login provider, we just change the login in the app extension, and then that's going to trickle down to all of our apps. So how unbelievably cool is that? App extensions allow us to tap into every aspect of Quasar, which makes it super scalable. I'm going to add in here app extensions. And then the third thing, and this is kind of goes beyond of the scope of what most people would probably want to do in their apps, but for huge applications like what we're building, you want to have a component library, and using an app extension, component library, there we go. Using an app extension, you can actually create your own Quasar component library that extends other Quasar components. The last thing I want to talk about then is upgrading. There we go. You can actually create your own component library. So this is really cool. What I can do, for example, is let's just say you're logged into one app, but you want to be able to easily switch between apps. You might then have a component that gives you a drop-down menu, and you can select different apps within that drop-down menu so that you switch to different apps within the Quasar application. And so the problem with that is if you create a new app, you then need to update that app list everywhere. And then if you create another app, you then need to update that list everywhere again. And obviously this doesn't scale well. And so using a component library, I can create that component once, and then we can use that component in all of my other Quasar apps. And just another example to sort of demonstrate this, I can feel myself waffling now, so I have to make this more concise, but there we go. I'm learning here. But maybe I'll actually say it's going to give me a chance, gives chance to touch on other things, to riff. I'll say here, riff on other ideas. Just so they know I'm not just going to talk specifically about scaling. We're going to talk a little bit about more about other stuff as well. All right, so what was I talking about? I was talking about component libraries, but then I kind of then started talking about, having your own component library. Yeah, okay, so here's another example where component libraries are awesome. I have a lot of base components that I build that I start using throughout all of my Quasar apps. So I can easily create a base component library of my own custom components that I use all of the time, and start using those in other applications. So even if they're not in my application, in my app at work, all of my Quasar apps, I now pull in my own component library and I'm able to use that. So the last thing I want to touch on is upgrading. Quasar does a phenomenal job. I don't know how they do it, to be honest. It just blows my mind. They do an amazing job of keeping the upgrade process quite easy and straightforward. Even though it is a large development, even though it gives you a full developer experience, you'd kind of think that it would be hard to upgrade. But it's surprisingly easy to upgrade your Quasar application, especially considering that it's a front-end framework and they're notoriously difficult to upgrade. So all of those things, the fact that I was able to begin on a simple application and then move on to something very large, and Quasar was able to scale with me. I think that kind of answers the question that yes, Quasar does scale really, really well. And honestly, it's an absolute joy to scale because every time you want to take the next step, it seems to have just already thought of that for you. Sweet. Okay, I'm moderately happy with that, but I might sort of practice that a little bit more on my own. And the last question I've got here is, and I don't know if I'll end up getting to all these, what are your plans for Quasar content moving forward? Yep, okay. So, getting started guide. And then I'm also going to be creating the wrapping components. No, wrapping Quasar components series. Right, so I'm going to talk about that. And then the last thing I will talk about here, what are your plans for Quasar? I might say, can I geek out on getting started API? So I'm going to sort of ask them that. Yeah, I think I'll ask them that. We'll see what happens. I'll see how it feels when I actually talk about it. All right. So what are your plans for Quasar content moving forward? Oh, okay. Oh gosh, that was so bad. What are your plans for Quasar content moving forward? So I have quite a few. Oh gosh, I should probably mention other things. So I'll quickly say podcast, the Quasar show. Um, and I'll put in here 3 podcasts so they know that. Yeah, okay, so let's start with that. So there's going to be 3 Quasar podcasts. So one of them's going to be the Quasar News podcast. One of them is going to be the Quasar Devs podcast, where we do like interviews with Quasar developers and maybe developers from other frameworks and other people around the Quasar community. But the one that's currently released is the Quasar Life podcast, and that's just me like chatting about stuff in the Quasar world that I've been up to. You know, stuff I do at work, talking about the mindset of being a developer. So that's one of the things that I've been working on in terms of content. And another thing that I do every 2 weeks is the Quasar Show, which is a show that premieres every 2 weeks, and we just talk about the latest happenings in the Quasar world, and I also like give a whole bunch of demonstrations with basic and more advanced demonstrations with what you can do with Quasar. So we've already done 2 episodes, so it's probably by the time this is released there'll probably be 3 or 4 episodes. So definitely check out the Quasar show. That should come up if you look it up on YouTube. If you're interested in just learning a bit more about Quasar, and yeah, I've had a lot of fun building that. So, but my main focus is quasarcast.com. So let's put in here sort of, this might be getting a bit too much. Quasarcast.com. Main focus. And then we can just tab this out. And then we might ask that question at the end. All right. Yeah, so my main focus is quasarcast.com. And there's 2 things that I'm currently working on there, which is a getting started guide. So this should be timely, because by the time this is released, that might actually be done. And so we're just going to go through all of the fundamentals of building a Quasar application, and then we'll have a look at exporting to all the different platforms. And if this is my teaching style is very much inspired by Jeffrey Way. So if you like Jeffrey Way from Laracast, hopefully you'll enjoy my videos as well. So yeah, there'll be the getting started guide, and then I'm going to work on something more advanced, which will be the wrapping Quasar components series. And I'm super excited about this. So these are like a lot of patterns that I use to wrap components in day-to-day life. And if I could just give you an example of that, because there's one wrapping component technique that I love to use, that I love to share with everyone, which is I call it the dialogue button component. And so one of the things I'll teach in this series is how to create a dialogue button component where it's a button and everything inside of that button. So if you imagine you've got like dialogue button in your template, and within that you've got some content. When you click on that button, it will automatically show a dialogue with that content. So a lot of you have probably followed that pattern over and over again, where you click on a button and then a dialogue comes up, and then you want to be able to and then you have to kind of build the dialogue from scratch and do all of that crap as well. So basically, I've just created a component where you throw all of the content for the dialogue directly in the button, and then when you click on it, it just shows that content. So, and we do stuff like, I do stuff like allowing you to have a toolbar on default and having a close button for the toolbar on by default. And, all of those, just little stuff like that. So I'm really excited about the wrapping Quasar component series. I've got like literally like 100 patterns in my mind that I'd love to share with people. And by the way, would it be okay if I kind of geeked out on one of the concepts I want to implement in the getting started guide? No, I feel weird asking that question. Yeah, so I might leave that like that. Yeah. Um, I might actually just talk about it here. Getting started guide API. Oh, and one of the cool things we're doing for the Getting Started guide is we're going to have our own custom API that will be publicly available. So you'll be able to go, for example, to API dash to do, because it's going to be a to do API, API dash to do.quasarcast.com slash and then like slash to do, and then that will give you a list of all of your to dos. And I'm basically building a global API that will be freely available on the web, and everything you do with that API will scope to your IP address. So what that means is when you're following the Getting Started guide, you'll be able to straight away use this API that will be freely available um, in order to in order to be able to get up and running without having to build out an entire backend. And then when we finish the Getting Started series, we're basically going to build out the backend ourselves, and we'll be able to build it out with different frameworks like Laravel or Firebase or Nest JS. You'll be able to sort of pick your own framework for the database part. Sorry, not the database. The for the backend part of the Getting Started guide. Yeah, so that's going to be super cool. I'm really excited about that. All right, so that's everything. Not perfect, but hey, who's ever perfect in a podcast? I really enjoy talking about this stuff, and I'm going to save that now onto my desktop, and we'll call this podcast notes. All right, there we go. I'm super excited to do this podcast, and of course, I'm going to let you guys all know when it's been released. And let me just see if there's any other questions. How long have you been writing Quasar? Any links you'd like us to? Do you have a video, book, or chapter? Yeah, all right. So I think I'll leave it at that. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, for adding a little bit of a pressure so that I could practice talking about this stuff. And I'll see you guys in the next